Welcome to the Folktale Project. This is Dan Scholz, and welcome to the final tale from our retelling of Waverley. And it's been a long time coming, but we're here. It'll be broken into two parts, and it wraps everything else up with a nice little bow. If you remember, Edward has been separated from the MacIvors and, quite honestly, with the rest of the battle, and he's wandering around in the countryside now. This is the Baron's Surprise. After wandering about for some time, Edward came unexpectedly upon a hamlet. Lights gleamed down the street, and Edward could hear loud voices and the tramp of horses. The sound of shouted orders and soldiers' oaths soon told him that he was in great danger, for these were English troops, and if they caught him in his MacIvor tartan, they would surely give him short shrift and a swift bullet. Lingering a moment uncertainly near the gate of a small garden enclosure, he felt himself caught by gentle hands and drawn toward a house.
"Come, Ned," said a low voice. "The dragoons are down in the village, and they will do thee a mischief. Come with me into Father's."
Judging this to be very much to the purpose, Edward followed, but when the girl saw the tall figure in tartans instead of the sweetheart she had expected, she dropped the candle she had lighted and called out for her father. A stout Westmoreland peasant at once appeared, poker in hand, and presently Edward found himself not ill-received, by the daughter on account of a likeness to her lover, so she said, and by the father because of a certain weakness for the losing side. So, in the house of Farmer Jopson, Edward slept soundly that night, in spite of the dangers which surrounded him on every side. In the morning, the true Edward, whose name turned out to be Ned Williams, was called in to consult with father and daughter. It seemed impossible for Edward to go north to rejoin the prince's forces. They had evacuated Penrith and marched away toward Carlisle. The whole intervening country was covered by scouting parties of government horsemen. Whereupon Ned Williams, who wished above all things to rid the house of his handsome namesake, lest his sweetheart, Cicely, should make other mistakes, offered to get Waverley a change of clothes and to conduct him to his father's farm near Ullswater. Neither old Jopson nor his daughter would accept a farthing of money for saving Waverley's life. A hearty handshake paid one, a kiss the other. And so it was not long before Ned Williams was introducing our hero to his family in the character of a young clergyman who was detained in the north by the unsettled state of the country. On their way into Cumberland, they passed the field of battle where Edward had lost sight of Fergus. Many bodies still lay upon the face of the moorland, but that of Vicky and Vore was not among them, and Edward passed on with some hope that, in spite of the Bodach Glas, Fergus might have escaped his doom. They found Callum Beg, however, his tough skull cloven at last by a dragoon's sword, but there was no sign of either Evan or his chieftain. In the secure shelter of good Farmer Williams's house among the hills, it was Edward's lot to remain somewhat longer than he had intended. In the first place, it was wholly impossible to move for 10 days owing to a great fall of snow. Then he heard how that the prince had retreated farther into Scotland, how Carlisle had been besieged and taken by the English, and that the whole north was covered by the hosts of the Duke of Cumberland and General Wade. But in the month of January it happened that the clergyman who came to perform the ceremony at the wedding of Ned Williams and Cicely Jopson brought with him a newspaper which he showed to Edward. In it, Waverley read with astonishment a notice of his father's death in London, and of the approaching trial of Sir Everard for high treason, unless, said the report, Edward Waverley, son of the late Richard Waverley and heir to the baronet, should in the meantime surrender himself to justice. It was with an achingly anxious heart that Waverley set out by the northern diligence for London. He found himself in the vehicle opposite to an officer's wife, one Mrs. Nosebag, who tormented him all the way with questions, on several occasions almost finding him out, and once at least narrowly escaping giving him an introduction to a recruiting sergeant of his own regiment. However, in spite of all risks, he arrived safely under Colonel Talbot's roof, where he found that, though the news of his father's death was indeed true, yet his own conduct certainly had nothing to do with the matter, nor was Sir Everard in the slightest present danger. Whereupon Much relieved as to his family, Edward proclaimed his intention of returning to Scotland as soon as possible, not indeed to join with the rebels again, but for the purpose of seeking out Rose Bradwardine and conducting her to a place of safety. It was not perhaps the wisest course he might have pursued, but during his lonely stay at Farmer Williams's farm, Edward's heart had turned often and much to Rose. He could not bear to think of her alone and without protection. By means of a passport which had been obtained for one Frank Stanley, Colonel Talbot's nephew, Waverley was able easily to reach Edinburgh. Here, from the landlady with whom he and Fergus had lodged, Edward first heard the dread news of Culloden, the slaughter of the clans, the flight of the prince, and worst of all, how Fergus and Evan Dhu, captured the night of the skirmish, were presently on trial for their lives at Carlisle. Flora was also in Carlisle, awaiting the issue of the trial, while with less certainty Rose Bradwardine was reported to have gone back to her father's mansion of Tully Veolan. Concerning the brave old baron himself, Edward could get no news, save that he had fought most stoutly at Culloden, but that the government were particularly bitter against him because he had been out twice. That is, he had taken part both in the first rising of the year 1715 and also in that which had just been put down in blood at Culloden. Without a moment's hesitation, Edward set off for Tully Veolan, and after one or two adventures he arrived there, only to find the white tents of a military encampment whitening the moor above the village. The house itself had been sacked. Parts of the stables had been burned, while the only living being left about the mansion of Tully Veolan was no other than poor Davy Gellatley, who, chanting his foolish songs as usual, greeted Edward with the cheering intelligence that we're dead and gane, Baron Bailey Saunders Saunderson, and Lady Rose that sang a sweet. However, it was not long before he set off at full speed, motioning Waverley to follow him. The innocent took a difficult and dangerous path along the sides of a deep glen, holding on to bushes, rounding perilous corners of rock, till at last the barking dogs directed them to the entrance of a wretched hovel. Here, Davy's mother received Edward with a sullen fierceness which the young man could not understand, till, from behind the door, holding a pistol in his hand, unwashed, gaunt, and with a 3 weeks' beard fringing his hollow cheeks, he saw come forth the Baron of Bradwardine himself. After the first gladsome greetings were over, the old man had many a tale to tell his young English friend. But his chief grievance was not his danger of the gallows, nor the discomfort of his hiding-place, but the evil doing of his cousin, to whom, as it now appeared, the barony of Bradwardine now belonged. Malcolm of Inchgrabbit had, it appeared, come to uplift the rents of the barony, but the country people, being naturally indignant that he should have so readily taken advantage of the misfortune of his kinsman, received him but ill. Indeed, a shot was fired at the new proprietor by some unknown marksman in the gloaming, which so frightened the heir that he fled at once to Stirling, and had the estate promptly advertised for sale. In addition to which, continued the old man, though I bred him up from a boy, he hath spoken much against me to the great folk of the time, so that they have sent a company of soldiers down here to destroy all that belongs to me, and to hunt his own blood kin like a partridge upon the mountains. Aye, cried Janet Gellatley, and if it had not been for my poor Davy there, they would have catched the partridge too. Then, with a true mother's pride, Janet told the story of how the poor innocent had saved his master. The baron was compelled by the strictness of the watch to hide all day and most of the nights in a cave high up in the wooded glen. A comfortable enough place, the old woman explained, for the goodman of coarse clore had filled it with straw. But his honour tires of it, and he comes down here whiles for a warm at the fire or at times asleep between the blankets. But once, when he was going back in the dawn, 2 of the English soldiers got a glimpse of him as he was slipping into the wood and banged off a gun at him. I was out on them like a hawk, crying if they wanted to murder a poor woman's innocent bairn. Whereupon they swore down my throat that they had seen the old rebel himself, as they called the baron. But my Davy, that some folk take for a simpleton, being in the wood, caught up the old grey cloak that his honour had dropped to run the quicker, and came out from among the trees as if he were speaking, majoring, and play-acting so like his honour that the soldiermen were clean beguiled, and he even gave me a 6pence, to say nothing about having there let off a gun at poor Crackpane Sawney, as they named my Davy. It was not till this long tale was ended that Waverley heard what he had come so far to find out, that Rose was safe in a house of a Whig laird, an old friend of her father's, and that the baillie, who had early left the army of the prince, was trying his best to save something out of the wreck for her. The next morning Edward went off to call on Bailie Macwheeble. At first the man of law was not very pleased to see him, but when he learned that Waverley meant to ask Rose to be his wife, he flung his best wig out of the window and danced the Highland fling for very joy. This rejoicing was a little marred by the fact that Waverley was still under prescription. But when a messenger of the bailies had returned from the nearest post-town with a letter from Colonel Talbot, all fear on this account was put at an end. Colonel Talbot had, though with the greatest difficulty, obtained royal protections for both the Baron of Bradwardine and for Edward himself. There was no doubt that full pardons would follow in due course. Right thankfully the Baron descended from his cave as soon as Edward carried him the good news, and with Davy Gellatley and his mother all went down to the house of Bailie Macwheeble, where supper was immediately served. It was from old Janet Gellatley, Davy's mother, that Waverley learned whom he had to thank for rescuing him from the hands of Captain Gifted Gilfillan, and to whom the gentle voice belonged which had cheered him during his illness. It was none other than Rose Bradwardine herself. To her Edward owed all. She had even given up her jewels to Donald Bean Lean so that he might go scatheless. She it was who had provided a nurse for him in the person of old Janet Gellatley herself, and lastly, she had seen him safely on his way to Holyrood under the escort of the sulky Laird of Balmawhapple. So great kindness certainly required very special thanks, and Edward was not backward in asking the Baron for permission to accompany him to the house of Duckran where Rose was at present residing. So well did Edward express his gratitude to Rose that she consented to give all her life into his hands, that he might go on showing how thankful he was. Of course, the marriage could not take place for some time, because the full pardons of the Baron and Edward took time to obtain. For Fergus MacIver, alas, no pardon was possible. He and Evan Dhu were condemned to be executed for high treason at Carlisle, and all that Edward could do was only to promise the condemned chieftain that he would be kind to the poor clansman of Vicky and Vore, for the sake of his friend. As for Evan Dhu, he might have escaped. The judge went the length of offering to show mercy if Evan would only ask it. But when Evan Dhu was called upon to plead before the court, his only request was that he might be permitted to go down to Glenaciach and bring up 6 men to be hanged in the place of Vicky and Vore. "And," he said, "ye may begin with me, the first man." At this there was a laugh in the court, but Evan, looking about him sternly, added, "If the Saxon gentlemen are laughing because a poor man such as me thinks my life or the life of any 6 of my degree is worth that of Vicky and Vore, they may be very right. But if they laugh because they think that I would not keep my word, and come back to redeem him, I can tell them that they can neither the heart of a Highlandman nor the honour of a gentleman." After these words there was no more laughing in that court. Nothing now could save Fergus MacIver. The government will resolved on his death as an example, and both he and Evan were accordingly executed, along with many others of the unhappy garrison of Carlisle. And that is the first part of the Baron's surprise, and we have a surprise. In fact, it is the Baron. We learn what happens to Evan Dhu and to Fergus MacIver, and we get a good glimpse into what is going to happen to Edward. But we'll find out what really happens at the end, on Friday, in part 2 of the Baron's surprise. This is Dan Scholz with the Folktale Project. Don't forget that you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Overcast, anywhere you like to get your podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at Folktale Project. You can find us on Auto Radio, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, anywhere you like to listen. And you can always head over to folktaleproject.com, where you'll find a new story waiting for you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. As always, thank you so much for listening.